Have you ever wondered what secrets still lie buried beneath the earth, carved in stone, cast in gold, or hidden in forgotten soil? Welcome to Unearthed Secrets, where we uncover the world's strangest artifacts and mysteries that challenge history itself. Hit subscribe for 10 years of good luck, drop a like, and tell us in the comments where you're watching from. Alright, let's begin. The Vishap Stele. High in the rugged highlands of Armenia, where the air grows thin and the mountains stretch like stone giants toward the horizon, there stand silent guardians of a forgotten world. Enormous monoliths of basalt and tuff, carved into shapes that defy easy explanation. They are called Vishap Stele, dragon stones, ancient monuments raised by hands we cannot name, for reasons we can only imagine. They lean against time itself, weather-worn, scarred, yet unbroken, scattered across the slopes and valleys of a land older than memory. To gaze upon them is to feel the weight of millennia pressing gently against your chest. Their presence is unsettling and soothing all at once, like a whisper of truth that refuses to be spoken clearly. Were they markers for water, guardians of springs, or symbols of animals once tied to cults of fertility and survival? Were they totems of reverence, carved for gods we no longer remember? Or were they left behind by people who wanted only to honor the land itself, leaving stone in place of words that would fade? Close your eyes for a moment and imagine the landscape in which they stand. Imagine a cool wind sliding down from the peaks of Mount Ararat, stirring the grass at your feet. The air is heavy with the scent of wild thyme, sage, and the faint sharpness of cold rock warmed by sunlight. In the distance, the sound of rushing water echoes through a ravine, a spring bubbling with a force that has never ceased for thousands of years. And beside that water, planted in the earth, are pillars rising taller than a man, carved with the forms of fish, cattle, and serpentine figures, sculptures that merge the natural world with something otherworldly. These are the Vishap Stele. To stand near one is to feel that strange, uncanny stillness that ancient monuments carry. They neither speak nor stay silent. They seem to wait. Armenia, long before it was a crossroads of kingdoms, empires, and faiths, was a cradle of ancient traditions rooted in survival against the mountains. The people who carved these stones belonged to a world bound tightly to rivers and springs, for in this land water meant life. The stele are often found near sources of water, as though guarding them. Many are carved with fish, some stylized, some so naturalistic that you can imagine their scales shimmering in the sun. The fish, perhaps, symbolized not only sustenance but the eternal cycle of life. Others bear carvings of bulls, their horns curling outward in a gesture of strength and fertility, reminders of herds that provided food, hides, and ritual offerings. But then there are the serpentine forms, long, winding shapes that curl up the stones like dragons climbing the sky. The Armenians called them vishaps, dragons. In the myths of this region, dragons were not the fire-breathing beasts of later European imagination, but vast, powerful creatures of water and sky, creatures tied to thunderstorms, floods, and fertility. They could both bless the land and destroy it. To place a vishap in stone near a spring may have been an act of reverence, an offering to keep the waters flowing, to keep the storms kind, to keep the earth fertile. Step closer in your imagination. Run your hand along the surface of one of these megaliths. Feel the roughness of stone beneath your fingertips, the tiny ridges where a chisel once bit into volcanic rock thousands of years ago. Each line is deliberate, etched with patience. You cannot help but wonder about the person who carved it. Who were they? Did they kneel before the half-finished figure, striking stone with stone, whispering prayers into the grooves as they worked? Did they see themselves as an artist, a priest, a laborer, or all three at once? The stones themselves vary greatly. Some stand up to 5 meters tall, towering above human height, their presence unmistakable from afar. Others are shorter, more modest, perhaps meant to mark a specific spring or small gathering place. A few are broken, shattered by time, or by hands that did not understand their meaning. Yet even in ruin their shapes remain, the carvings still visible in the right light. Imagine a community gathered at one of these springs long ago. Picture them approaching in silence, carrying offerings, bowls of grain, small figurines of clay, perhaps even young animals for sacrifice. They stop before the towering Vishap stone, water bubbling behind it. The elders step forward first, sprinkling barley into the stream, whispering blessings into the air. Children peek around their parents' shoulders, wide-eyed, as the ritual unfolds. A priest raises their hands, tracing the shape of the fish carved into the monolith, invoking the spirits of water to keep flowing through the valley. For these people, the stone was alive. It was not merely a carving, it was the presence of the divine in their landscape. Over the centuries, myths grew around them. The dragon stones, it was said, were once living beings, frozen into stone by gods or by time. Others whispered that they were markers of ancient heroes buried beneath, or guardians of unseen treasures hidden in the earth. When the land changed hands, when Christianity spread across Armenia in the 4th century CE, the first kingdom to officially adopt the new faith, the old meanings faded, but the stones remained. Villagers gave them new stories. Some said the stelae could bring rain if touched, others that they protected the flocks from disease. In a world of constant change, the stones adapted, just as the people did. Now imagine yourself wandering through those highlands today, centuries later. The modern world hums far away, and here only the wind, the mountains and the stones remain. You walk slowly, the earth crunching beneath your steps, until you stand before one of the great vishaps. Its surface is cracked, its base mossy, but the carved figure of a fish still swims across its face. You tilt your head, squinting to see it better in the shifting sunlight. Suddenly the carving seems to ripple, as though moving. You blink, and it is still again. Was it the light? Or was it something deeper? Some memory trapped in the stone itself, replaying for anyone who dares to look too long. Archaeologists first began to document these stones in the late 19th and early 20th centuries. Their interest was immediate. Such massive monoliths, carved with such distinct imagery, could not be ignored. They noted their proximity to water sources, the repeated motifs of fish, bulls, and serpents. Yet even with modern study, the precise purpose remains elusive. No written records exist from the people who made them. No legends from that time have survived intact. The Vishap stelae belong to that vast silence of prehistory, where interpretation is always a mixture of science and wonder. Some theories suggest they were grave markers, linked to early burial practices. Others believe they were purely ritualistic, tied to water cults. Still others think they may have been territorial markers, symbols of power erected by clans to claim and protect fertile valleys. What is clear is that they required great effort, quarrying, shaping, transporting, and erecting stones that weighed many tons. Such effort was not wasted lightly. Whatever the Vishap stelae were, they mattered deeply to the people who raised them. Night falls in your imagination, and you remain at the foot of the stone. The air grows colder, the mountains painted in shades of violet and gray. A thin crescent moon rises above the ridgeline. In the quiet, you notice how the stone seems to change again. By day, it was a fish. By twilight, it becomes a shadow of a serpent, coiling upward. You realize then that the stone's carvings are not fixed in meaning. They live with light, with the turning of the sun and moon. Perhaps the ancient people knew this. Perhaps they designed them to change, to show many faces in different hours of the day. You close your eyes and listen. The spring bubbles steadily, a timeless voice. The wind sighs against the stone. The Vishap stands unmoved, as it has for thousands of years. And in that moment, you feel what those ancient carvers must have felt, a connection between stone, water, sky, and life itself. The Vishap stelae are more than monuments. They are anchors of memory, reminders that long before our histories were written, long before our gods were named, people sought meaning in the land around them. They carved it into stone so it would endure, and endure it has, through empires, through wars, through centuries of silence, into our own age, where we now stand before them, still wondering. And so the dragon stones wait, silent, unyielding, eternal. Guardians of springs, keepers of myths, witnesses to the turning of the world. In their presence you understand that history is not only in books, it is in stone, in the wind, in the water that flows endlessly at their feet. And if you listen long enough, perhaps you too will hear the dragons breathing softly in the highland air. The Nimrud lens. Have you ever held something in your hands that seemed too perfect, too delicate, too strangely modern for the world it came from? Imagine a piece of crystal, polished smooth thousands of years ago, shaped so carefully that when the sun's light passes through, it bends, magnifies, and even burns. This is the Nimrud lens, an artifact so simple in appearance, yet so baffling in purpose, that it continues to puzzle archaeologists, historians, and dreamers alike. Was it a tool for sight, a device for fire, or a sacred object meant to hold the sun itself? Tonight, let us sink slowly into its story. The land where it was found is ancient Mesopotamia, in the ruins of Nimrud, once a flourishing Assyrian city in northern Iraq. The Assyrians built palaces of stone and decorated them with vast reliefs of kings, gods, and winged spirits. In these halls of power, somewhere among carved lions and walls etched with conquest, this small rock crystal was uncovered. At first glance, it might appear unremarkable, just a transparent oval of quartz, but closer inspection reveals edges smoothed and faces polished in a way that nature alone could not have done. Someone, over 2,500 years ago, had worked it. Someone had a reason. The lens itself is modest in size, barely a few centimeters across, its shape not entirely symmetrical, yet precise enough to bend light. Hold it over a line of cuneiform writing, and the signs swell larger, clearer. Tilt it toward the sun, and a beam of heat focuses into a pinpoint, hot enough to scorch. It is not perfect, Not the sort of flawless glass lens you might imagine from later centuries, but still, it works. And the question hums through the silence of centuries: why? The Assyrians were master builders, warriors, and administrators. Their stone reliefs show incredible detail: the feathers on a wing, the curls of a beard, the veins of a leaf. Did they need a magnifying tool to achieve such precision? Some have suggested the Nimrud lens might have been an artisan's helper, an object to bring the fine details of a carving into clearer view. Others wonder if it had a more practical use, a burning lens, a simple but powerful way to ignite fire using only sunlight. In a world where fire was sacred, tied to gods and rituals, such an object might have carried symbolic as well as functional meaning. There is another possibility, one more daring. Some scholars have whispered that perhaps the Assyrians, or at least their priests, used lenses like this to peer at the heavens. The Babylonians and Assyrians were skilled astronomers, charting planets, predicting eclipses, and tying celestial patterns to omens. If the Nimrud lens was mounted in a frame, if it were aligned just so, could it have magnified the glow of Venus, or brought the faint outline of Jupiter's moons into sharper relief? The evidence is not strong enough to claim certainty, but the thought lingers. A small crystal, linking the eyes of ancient stargazers to the deep sky. But before we let imagination run too far, it is worth remembering how fragile such objects are in interpretation. The Nimrud lens was found in 1850 by Austin Henry Layard, the British explorer who first excavated the palaces of Nimrud. He unearthed winged bulls, carved panels, and royal treasures. Yet this tiny piece of crystal stood out for its strangeness. Layard could not quite decide what it was. Over the years, theories multiplied. Some dismissed it as nothing more than a piece of polished quartz, an ornament with no special purpose. Others, enchanted by the way it focuses light, suggested it belonged to a long-forgotten science. Think of the hands that made it. To shape rock crystal requires patience, knowledge, and skill. Someone had to grind, smooth and polish it, perhaps for days, perhaps longer. Why go through that effort unless the result was valued? Did a craftsman create it at the request of a king? Did a priest hold it up to the sun during a ritual, the focused flame a spark of divine fire? Did an artist use it quietly, day after day, while carving cuneiform tablets so small the human eye strained to see them? If you walk through the ruins of Nimrud today, the city lies in fragments, stones scattered, walls fallen, traces of grand palaces eroded by time and war. The Assyrian kings who ruled here once commanded empires, stretching across deserts and rivers, reaching into mountains and distant cities. They recorded their triumphs in detail, boasting of lands conquered, enemies subdued. But nowhere do they mention a lens of crystal. Nowhere in their inscriptions does a word suggest magnification, optics, or sunlight bent to a point. The lens exists in silence, a whisper between the lines of history. Some dreamers go further, imagining that such knowledge was more widespread in the ancient world than we suppose. If one crystal lens was found in Nimrud, might there have been others, long since lost? The sands and soils of Mesopotamia have buried countless objects, many never to be unearthed. It is easy to picture an artisan's workshop with a row of polished stones, each crafted to bend light, each destined for some specific use now forgotten. Yet the evidence remains thin, fragile as the crystal itself. When we think of lenses today, we think of microscopes, telescopes, glasses that correct vision, cameras that capture the fleeting world. A lens is not just a tool, it is a way of extending the human eye, of pushing the boundaries of what we can see. The Nimrud lens reminds us that this idea, the desire to sharpen sight, is far older than the devices we hold now. Even in antiquity, someone realized that crystal shaped just so could change the way light behaves. Picture the scene. The sun is high above Mesopotamia, hot, relentless. A figure in robes holds the lens between thumb and forefinger, slowly turning it until a thin column of light sharpens on a piece of dry reed or parchment. Smoke curls, a spark leaps into flame. Others watch, murmuring, as fire, sacred, powerful, dangerous, springs forth from stone and sunlight alone. Did they see it as magic? Did they see it as proof of divine favor? Or imagine another setting. A scribe leans over a clay tablet, the signs of cuneiform pressed into its surface. The lens rests nearby, and when the light falls just right, he lifts it, studies the marks, and ensures every wedge-shaped impression is precise. Perhaps he feels a quiet pride, knowing his work will be clear not only to his eyes but to those who may read it long after. The truth remains elusive, but in a way, that is what gives the Nimrud lens its power. If it were merely a magnifying glass, we might shrug. If it were certainly only a trinket, a polished ornament, it might gather dust in a case. Instead, it hovers in uncertainty, in the space between possibility and proof. It forces us to imagine, to wonder what else the ancients might have known, what else might be buried, what else might one day come to light. The Nimrud lens today resides in the British Museum, resting quietly in a display case among other Assyrian artifacts. Visitors lean in, peer at the small crystal, perhaps surprised that something so delicate could emerge from so distant a past. Some walk past without more than a glance. Others linger, their reflections caught faintly on its surface, as though sharing a brief connection with the unknown craftsman who made it. If you stand before it long enough, you may notice how it catches the light even now, bending it, gathering it, transforming it, and you may feel a strange sense of continuity, that thousands of years ago, someone understood this effect, shaped it, and left behind this object as proof. That human curiosity, the drive to bend nature to our will, to see further, to capture fire from the sun, is not new. It is as old as civilization itself. The Nimrud lens is not large, not famous like the Rosetta Stone or the treasures of Tutankhamun, but sometimes the smallest things carry the deepest weight. A piece of rock crystal, carved by hands we will never know, lying silent in the ruins of a once great city. A fragment of light, caught in stone. As you drift now, let that image settle softly in your thoughts. The shimmer of sunlight through crystal, the warmth of fire blooming from its focus, the idea that someone long ago looked through this same lens, saw the world differently, and then set it down. The city has fallen, the kings are gone, the palaces are dust, but the lens remains. A reminder that even in the heart of the ancient world, people sought ways to shape light, to magnify vision, to capture the invisible. And so, as the story quiets, let your own mind rest. Let the image of that crystal fade into stillness, like a drop of sunlight sinking slowly into shadow. The mysteries of the past can wait. For now only the calm remains. The Ziwi Horde. The year was 1947, and in the rugged hills of northwestern Iran, near the town of Ziwi, shepherds tending their flocks made a discovery that would ripple through the fields of archaeology, history, and art alike. Beneath a layer of soil and stone, inside what seemed like the remains of a collapsed structure, they uncovered a glittering cache of objects: gold, silver, carved ivory, and finely worked artifacts that seemed to belong to many worlds at once. This find became known as the Ziwi Horde, a name that even today conjures images of buried treasure, of nomadic princes, of forgotten kingdoms perched between the shifting frontiers of empires. Yet what makes the Horde so compelling is not only its wealth of precious metals, but the artistic story it tells, one of cross-pollination, of styles and symbols traveling from the steppes of the Scythians, from the palaces of the Assyrians, from the rising power of the Medes, and from the dawn of Persia itself. It is a treasure chest, not of one culture, but of many. The Horde is dated to around 700 BC, a time when the region of Ziwi Horde was a crossroads, literally and figuratively. Caravans wound their way through the Zagros Mountains, carrying goods and ideas between Mesopotamia, Central Asia, and the Iranian plateau. Nomadic tribes pressed southward, bringing with them new motifs of animal combat, of spiraling horns and predatory claws. Settled empires pressed outward, leaving their mark with inscriptions, with lions, with winged deities cast in bronze or hammered into precious metal. In this swirl of contact, the Ziwi Horde seems to have crystallized, a snapshot of artistic fusion, preserved beneath the earth for over 2 millennia. Among the items were golden plaques, finely worked with images of animals in motion, lions attacking deer, eagles swooping down on prey. There were horse trappings, harness decorations, and ornaments that speak to a culture of riders, warriors, and aristocrats who measured their wealth not only in gold but in the strength and beauty of their steeds. Yet alongside these are ivory carvings whose style echoes Assyria, with its love of formalized beards and stiff garments. Some pieces show influences of Urartu, the highland kingdom to the north, while others whisper of Scythian steppe art, with its curling beasts and endless cycle of predator and prey. It is as though the Horde were a mirror, catching fragments of each culture that passed through, then reflecting them together into something new. The craftsmanship is high, but varied, as though drawn from multiple workshops. Some pieces may have been imported, traded, or plundered. Others may have been crafted locally by artisans who absorbed foreign styles and made them their own. And this raises the tantalizing question: what was Ziwi itself? Was it a royal seat of the Medes, a people then rising to power in these mountains, poised to challenge Assyria? Was it a wealthy fortress along caravan routes, where merchants and princes mingled? Or was it a burial site, the resting place of a chieftain whose treasures reflected the far reach of his alliances, battles, and conquests? The Horde itself does not answer, though it hints. Some of the gold plaques may once have adorned garments, sewn into ceremonial cloaks. Others may have covered furniture, or decorated the interior of a tent or hall. The ivories suggest connections to the great palaces of the Near East, perhaps carried back as gifts or spoils of war. The mixture is deliberate, curated. This was not random wealth, but chosen, treasured, and hidden. The timing, too, is crucial. Around 700 BC, Assyria was at its zenith, stretching its influence over much of the Near East. The Medes were still consolidating, but within a century they would become a dominant power. The Scythians, those elusive nomads of the steppe, were pressing closer. Their warriors on horseback weaving through history with sudden raids and shifting allegiances. Ziwiye sat at the convergence of these movements, and the horde may be read as a material reflection of that turbulence, a mosaic of cultures bound in gold. Consider one piece, a golden plaque showing a winged griffin, its talons outstretched, its body coiled with impossible strength. The motif is ancient, stretching back through Mesopotamia and into the myths of earlier civilizations. Yet here it appears with a fresh vigor, stylized in a way that recalls steppe art, while still bearing the stamp of Assyrian influence. It is a creature that belongs everywhere and nowhere, just like the horde itself. Other items include golden bowls, finely hammered with rosettes and geometric patterns, jewelry adorned with roped edges and tiny granules of gold, belt buckles decorated with spiraling horns. Each object is like a voice in a chorus, distinct yet harmonized, telling a story that is less about one people than about many. When archaeologists studied the horde, they were struck not only by its beauty, but by what it revealed about the permeability of borders in antiquity. We often imagine ancient empires as isolated, each with its own style, its own gods, its own art. But the Ziwi horde reveals a messier, more fluid truth, that cultures were constantly interacting, borrowing, reshaping. The Medes may have been distinct from the Assyrians, the Scythians from the Persians, but in the objects buried at Ziwi Hor, their lines blur, and yet, for all that it reveals, the horde also conceals. Its exact find circumstances are uncertain. Much of the collection entered museums and private hands without thorough excavation records. This has left scholars debating not only its context, but even its authenticity. Were all the items truly found together? Were some introduced later, through the market? The lack of clear provenance makes the Ziwi horde both a treasure and a puzzle, a tantalizing glimpse without a firm frame. Still, the weight of evidence suggests a genuine and remarkable cache, one that speaks to a real site of importance in northwestern Iran. The artistry of the objects is undeniable. Their fusion of styles is too consistent to be accidental. Even with missing pieces and uncertain details, the horde remains a keystone in our understanding of early Median culture, of the mingling of steppe and empire, of the dawn of Persia. Imagine then the horde as it once was, laid out in a dimly lit hall, glinting by firelight. Golden plaques shimmered against woven fabrics, ivory panels caught the glow, their carved figures seeming almost alive in the flicker. Warriors might have run their fingers across harness decorations before riding out. Nobles may have worn belts heavy with gold, their wealth displayed with every step, and somewhere perhaps beneath the earth of Ziwiye, it was all gathered, whether for safekeeping, as offerings, or as grave goods, we do not know. What remains is the shimmer of connection. The Ziwiye horde is less a single treasure than a conversation between north and south, east and west, steppe and city, nomad and empire. It is a reminder that even in antiquity, the world was linked, its peoples bound together by the exchange of goods, ideas, and art. And in the silence of the soil, for over 2,000 years, those voices waited, their song of gold and ivory carried forward to us across the ages. The Newark Holy Stones. Beneath the quiet, rolling hills of Ohio, in the mid-19th century, a discovery stirred whispers that would ripple far beyond the fields and streams of the American Midwest. What seemed at first like simple carved stones unearthed from ancient burial mounds soon revealed inscriptions, not in any familiar native language, nor in the symbols of American settlers, but in carefully incised letters of Hebrew. These relics, which came to be known as the Newark Holy Stones, would ignite debate, captivate imaginations, and divide scholars for more than a century and a half. The earth of Ohio, rich in soil and memory, had long sheltered secrets from civilizations whose names are lost to time. Mounds, earthworks, and geometric constructions rise across the landscape, remnants of the Hopewell and Adena cultures who flourished here 2,000 years ago. But when workers and amateur archaeologists of the 1800s began probing these ancient mounds, they uncovered more than pottery shards or bones. They pulled from the soil objects that seemed out of place, almost impossible, and perhaps too extraordinary to believe. The first of these was found in 1860 by a man named David Wyrick, a surveyor by trade. He was no stranger to the earthworks of Newark, Ohio, where massive geometric formations of earth stretched for miles, including an enormous octagon aligned with the movements of the moon. Wyrick, curious and convinced that the origins of these structures hid deeper mysteries, led excavations in the area. One day, while digging into a mound, he struck upon something solid, not the soft crumble of soil, not the brittle snap of bone, but the sharp resistance of stone. Carefully, he pulled it free. It was a rectangular block of sandstone, smooth on its sides, and carved with strange markings. These markings, after closer inspection, revealed themselves to be Hebrew letters, arranged with deliberation, etched with purpose. This was the first of what would become a series of discoveries, the so-called keystone, for its resemblance to the shape of an archstone, and later, an even more astonishing artifact, the Decalogue stone, inscribed with the Ten Commandments. For Weyrich, and for many who saw these stones, the implications were overwhelming. If genuine, they suggested contact between the ancient inhabitants of America and the peoples of the Near East, perhaps even Israelite migrants who had crossed the oceans long before Columbus or the Vikings. Some believed it lent credence to theories popular at the time that Native Americans were descended from the lost tribes of Israel, a narrative tied deeply into colonial, religious, and political imaginations of the 19th century. But as word spread, so too did doubt. The inscriptions, though in Hebrew, were not written in the ancient styles one might expect, but in forms close to those found in contemporary 19th century Hebrew texts. The carving seemed strangely modern, the grammar a little too neat, the letters suspiciously familiar. Accusations of forgery began to swirl, and Weyrich himself, once lauded for his discovery, found his reputation shadowed by suspicion. Some even whispered that he had carved them himself. Yet the story did not end there. The Decalogue stone, unlike the keystone, was not simply inscribed. It was carved into the form of a black limestone tablet, bearing on its surface not only Hebrew letters but an image of a bearded man, identified as Moses, holding the sacred commandments. The level of detail, the deliberate artistry, made it difficult to dismiss outright. It was not the work of a careless prankster, but of someone with skill and intention. As decades passed, scholars debated endlessly. Were the Newark holy stones genuine relics of an unknown contact between the old and new worlds? Or were they clever forgeries, planted to deceive, or perhaps to confirm pre-existing beliefs about biblical connections to America? The context of the 1800s cannot be ignored, a time when many Americans sought to weave the story of the New World into the broader fabric of biblical history, finding in Scripture a mirror for the landscapes they now inhabited. Imagine for a moment the scene in Newark in those years. A small town, fields stretching outward, the great earthworks looming in the distance, half swallowed by weeds and time. Into this environment came the holy stones, their inscriptions gleaming faintly under lantern light, their surfaces smooth under curious fingers. In the stillness of the Ohio evening, farmers, ministers, and local intellectuals would gather, staring at these objects with wonder or suspicion. Some saw them as miraculous confirmations of Scripture, proof that God's hand had touched even this far land. Others saw them as dangerous fabrications, inventions designed to mislead. And then there was Weyrich himself. History remembers him not kindly, for the controversy weighed heavily upon him. Though he insisted upon his innocence, the shadow of forgery clung to his name. Tragedy struck in 1864, when he died by his own hand. A man broken by accusations and haunted by the very stones he had brought into the world. Yet the stones endured. Today, they can still be found, preserved in museums, their inscriptions as sharp as the day they were carved. To see them in person is to feel a strange dissonance. Hebrew letters, the language of the ancient Near East, staring back from a relic said to be unearthed in the heart of Ohio. Whether authentic or forged, they carry the weight of mystery, a riddle inscribed in stone. The Newark holy stones raise larger questions that go beyond their authenticity. They remind us how history is often shaped as much by belief as by evidence, by what people wish to be true as much as by what the earth itself yields. In the mid-19th century, the idea of Israelites in America fit neatly into cultural and religious narratives that sought to explain the origins of the continent's native peoples. The stones seemed to provide material proof for these stories, and so, belief and skepticism collided, leaving the artifacts suspended in an ambiguous space between truth and invention. The Hopewell culture, whose mounds and earthworks once dominated the Ohio landscape, remains mysterious in its own right. Their vast geometrical constructions suggest advanced knowledge of astronomy and engineering, yet we know little of their spiritual life, their myths, or their language. To connect them with the Hebrew inscriptions of the Newark holy stones is to stretch across a chasm of silence, till perhaps that silence is what invites such connections. In the gaps of history, imagination often rushes in. Archaeologists of the present day are nearly unanimous in their skepticism. The stones, they argue, reflect too closely the theological debates of the 19th century. Their script too modern, their context too suspicious. But even in dismissal, the stones hold value. They are artifacts not of the ancient Hopewell, perhaps, but of 19th century America itself, a time capsule of belief, desire, and the longing to inscribe the familiar into the unknown. To lie awake at night and think of them is to picture a mound in Ohio, grass whispering in the wind, the soil dark and damp, and deep within it, a stone that should not be there. A stone bearing words from across the ocean, across millennia, words that speak of law, covenant, and the sacred. Real or false, they tap into something deep within the human spirit, the need for connection, for continuity, for the assurance that our world is not isolated but woven into a tapestry as vast as creation itself. And so, the Newark holy stones remain what they have always been, mysteries. Neither fully believed nor entirely dismissed, they sit at the crossroads of archaeology, faith, and folklore. Perhaps they are frauds, carved by a restless hand in the years before the Civil War. Or perhaps, however slim the chance, they are whispers from an ancient contact, the faint echo of travelers who left their mark before fading into the silence of time. As you close your eyes and drift deeper into rest, imagine them again, the stones, lying heavy in the earth, hidden for centuries beneath layers of soil, waiting to be found. Imagine the lantern light glinting on their surfaces, the quiet gasps of those who first saw the inscriptions, the endless debates that followed. In the end, they are more than artifacts, they are stories carved into stone, stories that will outlast us all. The Budo figurine. A small, carved statue, its surface smoothed by hands that lived and died 5 millennia ago, before written memory, before the neat lines of history. It is a figure at once crude and deliberate. Its head is suggested, its body abstracted, its very form hovering between human and symbol. Discovered, forgotten, and rediscovered centuries later. It carries with it the hush of mystery, a relic from Neolithic Scotland, fashioned from the bone of a whale that once swam the cold northern seas, brought ashore, perhaps hauled inland by early settlers who lived at the edge of land and tide. The Budo figurine sits at the intersection of human touch and timeless silence. Its meaning is unknowable, yet its presence lingers like the shadow of an old ritual. To imagine the Budo figurine, one must first close the distance between then and now. 5,000 years ago, Scotland was not the Scotland of castles, tartans, and songs. It was a raw land of stone and sea, dotted with small communities that lived by the rhythm of harvest and hunt. The Neolithic was an age of transformation, when humans turned from wandering gatherers into settled builders. Across the Orkneys and mainland, monuments were raised, henges, stone circles, chambered cairns. People aligned stones with stars and seasons, as if tying the cycles of nature to something permanent. In such a world, a small figurine carved from whalebone is not a triviality. It is part of that broader language of symbols and mysteries. The figurine itself is only around 7 centimeters tall, small enough to rest in the palm of a hand. Its surface is worn but bears clear shaping, a head-like swelling, a neck, and a broader lower section that suggests a body. Its features are abstract, yet the impression of a person is undeniable. It does not represent realism, but presence. Whoever carved it was not making a portrait, but perhaps giving form to an idea. Was it a deity, a spirit, a protective talisman? We cannot say. But the deliberate carving, the choice of material, and the care in shaping tell us that it mattered. Whalebone was no ordinary substance. For Neolithic people living near the sea, the whale was a creature of power. It was not hunted routinely, but when one washed ashore, it was an event, a gift, a feast, and a source of material unlike any other. Whalebone was dense, workable, and enduring. To carve a figurine from such bone was to draw on the presence of the sea itself, to bind human life with the forces of nature. Perhaps the Budo figurine was thought to contain something of the whale's spirit, now reshaped into human-like form. When it was found in the 19th century, the figurine was not recognized for what it was. It entered the collections of St. Andrew's University, but lay unnoticed in archives for over 150 years. It was not until the early 21st century that it was properly studied and identified as one of the oldest known human representations from Scotland. That long silence of neglect only deepens its mystery. For centuries, it slept, just as it had slept buried in the earth for millennia before. Each rediscovery is like the figurine stirring faintly in the collective memory of humankind. Imagine the people who made it. A small community clustered near the shore, their houses built of stone, turf, and timber. Smoke rising from hearths, nets drying in the wind, grain stored in clay pots, and somewhere, someone sitting with a piece of whalebone, cutting, scraping, shaping. The work is slow. The carver has no metal tools, only flint or stone blades. Every stroke requires effort, yet the form begins to emerge. A swelling at the top to suggest a head, a narrowing below for a neck. Perhaps others watched, curious. Perhaps it was made in solitude, in quiet reflection. The final object is simple, but it carries weight. We might imagine it being passed from hand to hand. The figurine's smoothness suggests it was handled, touched, perhaps carried. If it was an idol, it may have been placed in homes, in shrines, or in graves. If it was a teaching tool, perhaps it represented ancestors or spirits, a way of making the unseen tangible. The figurine's form is both general and personal. It could be anyone, yet it represents something more than one person. It belongs to that universal Neolithic tradition of abstraction, where form points beyond itself. The figurine reminds us that human beings have always sought to shape meaning out of matter. In every age, objects become symbols. The Buddha figurine is to the Neolithic what icons were to Byzantium, what amulets were to Egypt, what statues were to Rome. It belongs to that long continuum of giving form to belief. And yet, unlike the later traditions, its meanings are lost to us. The Neolithic left no writing, no texts, no explanations. Only stone, bone, and earth remain. The figurine's rediscovery is almost accidental. For generations it rested in a drawer. Curators catalogued it, but did not recognize its antiquity. When modern eyes finally studied it, the realization came: this was not a random carving, not a curiosity, but a relic of one of the earliest symbolic traditions in Scotland. Its survival is remarkable. Bone usually decays, yet this piece endured, like a whisper that refused to be silenced. To hold it today is to feel a bridge to deep time. The hand that carved it is gone. The community that revered it vanished. Their language unknown, their songs lost. Yet the figurine remains. It has no eyes, yet it seems to gaze. It has no mouth, yet it seems to speak. Its silence is eloquent. When we place it alongside other Neolithic art, connections emerge. Across Europe, small figurines appear, in Malta, in Anatolia, in the Balkans. Some are voluptuous, others abstract. Many are associated with fertility, ritual, or ancestor worship. The Buddha figurine fits within this broader tradition, yet it is distinctly local, hewn from the resources of Scotland's coast. It is both part of a universal human impulse and a unique artifact of its place. Perhaps it was left as an offering. Springs, rivers, and coasts were often sites of ritual deposition. To give an object to the earth or water was to return it, to seal a pact with the unseen. If the figurine was once cast into a bog, buried beneath a hearth, or hidden in a cairn, it may have been intended as a guardian or gift. Its burial preserved it, sealing it in the long patience of the ground, and so the Buddha figurine stands today, not just as an artifact, but as an emblem of forgetting and remembering. It was made, revered, buried, forgotten, found, forgotten again, and finally recognized. Each phase adds layers to its story. The figurine is not just Neolithic, it is also Victorian, modern, and timeless. Every era that encounters it sees something different. To gaze on it is to feel the presence of the unknown. Its small form radiates an aura far larger than its size. It tells us that humans 5,000 years ago sought connection, sought to embody mystery, sought to carry meaning in their hands. In the figurine's abstraction, we glimpse the depth of the human imagination, already ancient, already reaching beyond. And when the lights of the museum fade, and the halls fall silent, perhaps the figurine rests as it once did in the Neolithic dark, waiting, watching, holding in its quiet form a secret that no words can retrieve. The Birka ring. The soil of Sweden, black and damp from centuries of slow decay, once concealed a silver ring that would confuse and fascinate historians for generations. It lay in the ground for more than 1,000 years, cradled by the bones of a woman long forgotten, her grave silent and undisturbed until spades and careful hands uncovered her resting place at Birka, an ancient Viking trading town on the banks of Lake Mälaren. The ring itself was not ornate by the standards of kings or queens. It was not set with great gems, nor gilded with heavy filigree. It was delicate, a small circle of silver, and set into it was a stone of glass colored with a faint purplish hue. Upon its surface, scratched carefully, were letters in Kufic Arabic script, a word scholars would later decipher as Ilallah, meaning for Allah, or more simply, to God. It was a single object, a simple ring, yet its presence in a Viking grave spoke volumes, volumes that could not be neatly contained within the usual borders of history. Because the Vikings of Sweden, so often remembered as raiders, seafarers, and fierce warriors of the north, were also traders. Their ships went farther than many imagine, carrying furs, amber, iron, and slaves across seas and rivers to places as distant as Constantinople, Baghdad, and perhaps even beyond. But still, the sight of Arabic script on a Viking woman's hand raised more questions than answers. The grave was discovered in the late 19th century, a time when archaeology in Scandinavia was just beginning to mature into a careful science. At Birka, hundreds of graves were uncovered, many filled with treasures of trade and battle, swords, beads, brooches, coins, and ornaments. Yet this ring, now simply called the Birka ring, stood apart. Its stone was not a gem of northern geology. Its inscription was not runic, nor Latin, nor any writing native to Scandinavia. It was unmistakably Islamic, a piece of language born in lands much farther south and east. How had it traveled all this way? And more importantly, what did it mean? Some scholars suggested that the Vikings must have had more direct contact with the Islamic world than previously assumed. Others thought it might have been acquired through trade networks stretching across Rus, the the river routes that connected Scandinavia to the Black Sea and beyond. Viking merchants are known to have carried slaves from Slavic villages, traded with Byzantine officials, and exchanged goods in bustling markets where Arabic silver dirhams flowed in astonishing quantities. But a ring is not a coin. A coin can travel hundreds of hands, exchanged and melted and repurposed. A ring, engraved with the name of God in Arabic, seemed personal, it seemed devotional, and that led to deeper speculation. Could the woman buried with the ring have been Muslim herself? Was she a traveler from the East, settled in a Viking town, perhaps married to a local man? Or was she a Viking woman who wore an imported ring as a sign of prestige, unaware of its meaning but cherishing its exotic beauty? Both theories have been argued, and neither has been proven beyond doubt. When archaeologists examined the piece more closely in modern times, using advanced microscopes and materials analysis, they confirmed that the inscription had indeed been carved into the glass in antiquity. There was no sign of forgery, no evidence of a later addition. The Kufic letters were genuine, yet the ring's surface also bore traces of wear, suggesting it had been used, passed from hand to hand before it was buried. The purplish stone itself turned out not to be an amethyst as once thought, but colored glass, a common material in Islamic jewelry workshops, but one far rarer in the Scandinavian north. The presence of the ring became a symbol of the interconnectedness of the medieval world. It was a reminder that the Viking Age, which spanned from the late 8th to the 11th century, was not just an age of raiding monasteries and storming villages. It was also an age of movement, of commerce, and of curiosity. The same longships that carried warriors across the seas also carried merchants, and in their cargo holds they brought silk, spices, coins, and perhaps rings inscribed with foreign prayers. Yet still, mystery lingers around the Burka ring. The grave itself adds to the puzzle. The woman who wore it was not buried as a great warrior, but nor was she buried in obscurity. Her resting place was marked by items suggesting some degree of wealth and standing. And why, one wonders, would she be buried with a ring that invoked Allah's name, unless it meant something to her, or to those who laid her to rest? Could it have been a token of love, a gift from a foreign trader she knew? Could it have been carried as a charm, respected even by those who did not fully understand its inscription? We imagine the town of Burka, its wooden docks stretching into the waters of Lake Mälaren. In the 9th and 10th centuries, it was one of the most important trading centers in all of Scandinavia, bustling with life. Ships from across the Baltic arrived laden with goods. Merchants from distant lands mingled in its market stalls. The language of trade was diverse: Norse, Slavic tongues, Greek, Arabic. Imagine the sight of fabrics dyed in deep colors, coins glittering in the sun, glass beads and jewelry that shimmered with hues unknown in the north. Perhaps the ring was sold in such a marketplace, its Kufic inscription unnoticed or half understood, its beauty enough to make it desirable. But there is another layer to the story. Archaeological evidence shows that tens of thousands of Arabic silver coins made their way into Scandinavia during the Viking Age. Many were found in hoards buried beneath the soil, caches hidden away during times of danger, never retrieved by their owners. These coins often bore Arabic inscriptions, verses of the Quran, or declarations of faith. To the Vikings, however, they were valued for their silver, not their words. They cut them into pieces, melted them down, and recast them into jewelry. Could it be then that the Burka ring was created by a craftsman in the north, using imported materials and copying an inscription from a coin he only half understood? If that were the case, the inscription might not have carried its original religious weight. It might have been an exotic decoration, a pattern admired for its foreign look. Yet even if so, it still tells us of a cultural crossroads, a place where ideas and symbols traveled alongside goods, and where meanings shifted as they moved. But what if the inscription was not misunderstood? What if the woman buried with the ring had embraced its message? We know that the Vikings sometimes served as mercenaries in the East, particularly in the Byzantine Empire, where they became the feared Varangian Guard. Some even traveled further into the Islamic world, reaching Baghdad and beyond. Could one of them have returned with a wife or companion from those distant lands? Could the woman in Burka have carried not only a foreign ring, but also foreign beliefs, laid to rest in a grave that silently recorded her unique journey? The truth may never be known, and perhaps that is why the Burka ring continues to captivate. It sits in the collections of Sweden's historical museums, a small object encased in glass, but around it swirl entire worlds of possibility. It is a reminder that history is rarely neat. It is messy, tangled, filled with overlaps and intersections. A Viking woman and an Islamic inscription, two worlds that should not have met, but did, embodied in silver and glass. As you picture it, imagine the slow erosion of centuries, the soil pressing down upon the grave, the wood of the coffin rotting away, the bones crumbling to dust. Yet the ring, a small band of silver, enduring through it all, waiting to be uncovered. 1,000 years later it emerges, still carrying the faint letters scratched by an ancient hand, still whispering of journeys across seas, of markets filled with voices, of encounters we can scarcely imagine. The Burqa ring is not only a mystery of archaeology, it is also a meditation on connection, on how a single artifact can reveal the hidden threads that link distant peoples, on how the world has always been wider, more entangled, more surprising than we might believe. And so, as you drift into rest, let your mind wander with it, across rivers and seas, through bustling markets and silent graves, following the journey of a silver ring inscribed with a prayer, carried from one world to another, and left to sleep in the earth until we were ready to find it. The cloaked stone circles. The desert is not empty. It never truly has been. Though to the hurried traveler, it may seem like an endless sweep of rock and dust. Under the heat of the Syrian sun, the Herat stretches out in waves of black basalt, a hardened sea of ancient fire. Wind whistles across this barren crust, carrying sand into the hollows, polishing stone until it gleams. And yet, hidden in this harsh plain, there are circles of stone, arranged with deliberate care, their shapes preserved through thousands upon thousands of years. From above, the patterns emerge, rings, alignments, wheels, radiating spokes. From the ground, they are quiet, almost unnoticeable against the blackened fields of volcanic rock. They are the cloaked circles, their forms masked by erosion and shadow, but still present, still enduring. Archaeologists call them the desert kites, the wheels, the Herat structures. But to those who stumble upon them in the silence of the wasteland, they are mysteries, monuments of a forgotten purpose. The Herat is vast. It stretches from the deserts of southern Syria into northern Arabia, a landscape scarred by lava flows that hardened into rough fields. Few would choose to settle here, where water is scarce and the land is harsh. Yet thousands of years ago, someone did more than settle. Someone moved stones, dragging them across jagged terrain, setting them upright, laying them flat, arranging them into circles and lines that still remain. Some are small, no wider than a modest house. Others stretch across hundreds of meters, their arcs only fully revealed from the vantage of the sky. A bird soaring overhead, or a modern satellite eye, can see the true scope of these works. From the ground they blur into the chaos of basalt, nearly invisible. It is as though they were built to be hidden from those who walk the earth, and revealed only to the heavens above. The first reports came from early pilots in the 20th century. Looking down from their aircraft as they crossed the deserts, they glimpsed strange patterns etched into the landscape. At first, they seemed like the work of nature, cracks, fissures, perhaps the remnants of volcanic activity. But too many were perfect circles, too many had symmetry, balance, order. Nature rarely works in perfect rings. There are hundreds of these stone circles scattered across Syria, Jordan, and Arabia. Some connect to lines, like the outspread spokes of a wheel. Others stand alone, silent rings. Archaeologists who have walked among them describe the crunch of boots on ancient stones, the way the heat ripples across their edges, and the overwhelming sense of time pressing down. These stones have stood here longer than empires, longer than cities, longer even than the earliest scripts carved into clay. They are Neolithic, 10,000 years old, or perhaps older still, and their purpose remains uncertain. Some suggest they were observatories, circles aligned to the rising and setting of the sun, markers of solstices and equinoxes, calendars for a people who measured time in shadows and stars. When you stand within one of these circles at dawn, the rising light casts long lines that may have once been predictable, a way of knowing when to plant, when to harvest, when to move on. Others see them as ritual spaces, sanctuaries of stone. The Neolithic peoples who roamed these deserts left few written clues, no tablets or scrolls, but across the world, circles of stone often hold sacred meaning. Perhaps here too, ceremonies were held, offerings placed, dances traced in the dust. Imagine the flicker of firelight against basalt walls, the chants carried on desert winds, the weight of sky pressing down upon those gathered. Still others believe they were markers of the dead. Some circles contain cairns, piles of stone under which bones have been found. Could these have been tombs, memorials, places where ancestors were laid to rest? The basalt preserves little, but scattered bones and artifacts whisper that the circles may have been linked to burial and remembrance. Then there are the desert kites. Structures shaped like vast funnels, with long arms stretching across the land. They were used, some believe, as hunting traps. Herds of gazelle or oryx would be driven into the wide mouth, funneled toward a narrow end where hunters waited. From above, the kites are unmistakable, vast V-shapes cut across the desert floor. But the circles nearby, where they connected, perhaps places of storage or gathering or celebration after the hunt, or were they something entirely separate? The debate continues, as it has for decades. Each excavation reveals hints but no certainty. Tools have been found, fragments of pottery, bones of animals consumed by fire, but no inscription explains their purpose. No voice from the past rises to tell us why. What is most haunting is their scale. To move such stone across such hostile land required labor, organization, determination. A community had to exist here, large enough and stable enough to devote time not just to survival, but to construction. And not construction for shelter or immediate necessity, but for something greater, something symbolic, something enduring. As you drift deeper into the vision of these circles, picture a people gathered in the desert, the air cool at dawn, before the sun rises to its full strength. They bring stone from the surrounding fields, black basalt, shaped by volcanic fire, long before humans walked here. They place each stone carefully, lining them in arcs, setting them upright as markers. They pause, look to the horizon, adjust, align. What did they see? Did the circle guide the first rays of the sun? Did it echo the arc of stars above? When night fell, the desert sky would have blazed with stars. No cities, no artificial light, only the Milky Way spilling across the heavens, brighter than most modern eyes will ever know. Under such a sky, the circle of stone would seem like an anchor, a reflection of the heavens traced on the earth below. Perhaps that was the intent, to mirror the sky in stone, to bring the order of the cosmos down to the human world. But silence keeps its secrets. Today, many of the circles are nearly invisible. Shifting sands have covered their edges. Erosion has scattered stones, toppling walls that once were precise. Only through aerial photography, satellite imaging, and careful mapping can the patterns be fully revealed. From the ground, the illusion of chaos remains, but from the air, the order is undeniable. Someone, long ago, cared enough to make these marks last. The desert is harsh, but it is also preservative. Unlike the forests where wood rots or the rivers where stone is washed away, the desert leaves things where they fall. That is why the cloaked stone circles endure. Not by accident, but by design, and by the stillness of their chosen home. The Harat remains a place few visit. Wars, politics, shifting borders, and the danger of the land itself have left many of these circles unstudied. Archaeologists glance at satellite images, marking dots on maps, cataloging the spread. But walking among them is rare. Most who have done so speak of the eerie quiet, the way time seems to stop. To stand in a circle built 8,000 years ago, in a desert that has barely changed, is to touch something close to eternity. Perhaps the builders intended exactly that. Perhaps they wished their work to last beyond themselves, beyond their children, beyond even memory. A monument not to be read, but to be felt. Theories will continue, but the circles themselves remain, silent and enduring. They are cloaked not only by basalt and sand, but by time itself. Their meaning is veiled, hidden as though deliberately from us, and yet their presence is undeniable. They whisper that even in the most desolate places, human hands reached for order, for connection, for meaning. The Harat circles are not famous like Stonehenge, nor towering like the pyramids, nor inscribed like the ziggurats. They are humble in their stones, low to the ground, nearly lost to view, but they are older than most, and in their silence, they speak more deeply. Imagine now the desert night, stars blazing overhead, the basalt plain cooling after the heat of day. In the center of one circle, a fire burns, casting light against black stone. Shadows dance, flickering against the ring, echoing the stars above. Around the fire, people gather, our distant ancestors. They speak in tongues long lost, sing songs we cannot know. They look up as we do, at the stars, wondering what lies beyond, wondering what endures, and they build circles of stone, so that thousands of years later, we might wonder too. The Malia Bee Pendant. It begins, as so many mysteries do, with a glimmer beneath the soil. The summer air of Crete is hot, the ground baked, the winds dry. A team of archaeologists kneels in the dust, carefully brushing away centuries of silence, and from beneath a thin veil of earth emerges a small shape. At first it appears no different from a common lump of rock or a piece of discarded bronze, but then light catches on its surface. It is gold, bright, untarnished, shimmering even after more than 3,000 years of burial, and as the soil falls away, its form begins to reveal itself. Two bees, facing each other, wings spread wide, their bodies crafted with uncanny precision, their heads bent toward a delicate drop of honey, or perhaps a golden sphere, representing the very essence of life. This is the Malia Bee Pendant, a work of art, of devotion, of mystery. Dated to around 1800 BCE, it is one of the finest examples of Minoan goldsmithing ever discovered. And it has become more than a piece of jewelry. It has become a window, however small, into a world that remains only half seen, half known, half whispered, through fragments of ruins and shards of pottery. The bees of Malia sit frozen in their eternal dance. Their wings are open, their legs curved toward the sphere that hangs between them, a tiny granule of gold that somehow feels vast in its symbolism. The pendant is balanced, symmetrical, alive in a way that gold so rarely seems to be. One can imagine it catching the sun, glowing warm against the chest of the person who once wore it. But who were they? A priestess? A noblewoman? A ruler? Was it a token of office, or a charm against misfortune? Was it worn daily, or only during the great rituals of the Minoan palaces? The island of Crete in the Bronze Age was no ordinary place. It was the heart of a civilization so advanced, so vibrant, that later Greek myths looked back upon it as a golden age. Here the Minoans built vast palaces at Knossos, Phaistos, Zakros, and Malia itself. They paved courtyards, painted walls with brilliant frescoes, traded with Egypt, Mesopotamia, and the Cyclades. They danced, they sang, they worshipped gods and goddesses whose names are lost, though their faces linger faintly in surviving images. And in their art, again and again, bees appeared. Bees were not simply insects to the Minoans, they were sacred. They transformed flowers into honey, the liquid gold of the gods, sweet and eternal, resistant to decay. Honey was food, medicine, offering. Bees connected earth to sky, plant to nectar, human to divine. In Minoan myth, later echoed by the Greeks, bees were linked to the great goddess, the mother of all things, the bringer of fertility. Priestesses of certain cults were even called bees. To wear the bee pendant was not just to wear an ornament, it was to carry a fragment of sacred meaning, pressed into gold, bound close to the heart. The craftsmanship is astonishing. Ancient jewelers worked gold with methods that still impress modern goldsmiths. The pendant was made using filigree, fine threads of gold twisted and soldered into delicate shapes and granulation. The application of minuscule gold spheres, each barely larger than a grain of sand. To create such perfect, precise forms without the aid of modern tools required extraordinary skill and patience. Every curve of the bees' wings, every tiny granule in their bodies, was placed by steady hands and trained eyes. It is a work not only of art but of devotion. And yet the pendant is not unique, or rather, it is unique in its beauty, but not alone in its theme. Across Crete and beyond, similar designs have been found. Bees and double axes, bees and spirals, bees joined with symbols of the sun and moon. This suggests a wider tradition, a language of sacred imagery, now mostly lost to us. The pendant from Malia is one of the most complete and perfect survivals of that forgotten language. A page from a book of rituals that has otherwise crumbled into dust. Imagine for a moment the palace of Malia as it stood in the Bronze Age. Not the ruins we see today. Weathered stone walls barely rising above the ground, but a living complex. Wide courtyards filled with dancers. Storerooms packed with amphorae of oil and wine. Corridors painted with bright frescoes of dolphins, lilies, and bulls. The sound of footsteps echoing in polished halls. Somewhere within, in a treasury or shrine, the bee pendant rests, waiting to be taken up. Perhaps it was worn during a festival of spring, when flowers burst into bloom and bees filled the air with their hum. Perhaps it was carried into ceremonies where honey was poured out as an offering to the gods. Perhaps it was a symbol of death and rebirth, of the soul rising like a bee into the afterlife. The pendant itself offers no answers, only questions. But in those questions, a strange calm emerges, because the Minoan world was itself an unanswered question. Their writing, linear A, remains undeciphered, their gods unnamed, their stories lost. What remains are fragments, images, symbols, objects like the bee pendant that whisper to us but never fully explain themselves. And so, as with so many mysteries of the ancient world, we are left to sit quietly and imagine. The bees themselves invite this quiet reflection. Watch a bee at work, and time slows. It moves from flower to flower, patient, steady, never hurried. A colony of bees is a rhythm, a harmony, a hum of life sustained through cooperation. The pendant seems to capture that hum, that timeless balance, frozen in gold. Two bees facing each other, joined not in conflict, but in unity, sharing the golden drop between them. Is it honey? Is it the sun? Is it the seed of life itself? We do not know, and perhaps we do not need to. For in the end, the pendant is not simply about the past, it is also about the way humans seek meaning in the world. We take what we see, bees, honey, gold, and weave it into symbols. We craft from the material of the earth something that speaks to the immaterial, to gods, to eternity. The pendant reminds us that even 3,000 years ago, people were doing what we still do today, turning nature into story, labor into art, life into memory. The Malia bee pendant rests now in a museum, silent under glass, admired by visitors from around the world. Its gold still gleams, its bees still face one another, their wings still spread as if ready to take flight. And though we can no longer hear the music of the Minoan festivals, nor taste the honey offered on their altars, nor feel the rhythm of their dances, we can look at this pendant and catch, for a moment, the echo of their world. A world where bees were sacred, gold eternal, and life itself a mystery to be cherished. And in that silence, As the bees remain forever poised around their golden sphere, one feels almost as though the hum of an ancient hive lingers in the air, soft, steady, endless. The Petrolona Skull. In the north of Greece, among the limestone ridges of Chalkidiki, lies a place where time feels stretched thin, like parchment worn by too many centuries. It is there, in a cave now quiet, with dripping water and slow-breathing darkness, that one of the most haunting discoveries of human antiquity came to light. The story of the Petrolona skull is not simply the tale of a fossil, it is a weaving of questions about who we are, where we come from, and how many forgotten branches of humanity once walked upon the earth before fading into silence. The cave itself rests near the village of Petrolona, a name that in Greek whispers of stone and rock. At first glance, there is nothing extraordinary about it. Shepherds had passed near its entrance for generations. Children sometimes played close by, unaware of the abyss beneath their feet. The cave opened into chambers carved by groundwater over millions of years, where stalactites hung like icicles from a ceiling painted with the soot of ancient torches. Yet for centuries, its contents remained hidden. That was until the mid-20th century, when a shepherd stumbled upon its entrance once more. Inside, explorers began to push into the darkness, following narrow corridors and climbing over slippery stones. The air smelled faintly metallic, heavy with the damp of ages. Torchlight caught glimmers on the walls, and soon bones were found. Animal bones, fossilized remains of bears, deer, and lions from a long-lost ice age. Then, in 1960, a skull was discovered, partially fused with the calcite of the cave wall. It was not the skull of an animal. It was human, or almost human. Its brow ridges were heavy, its cranial vault thick, its teeth robust. Yet it did not belong to modern Homo sapiens. This was something older, something caught in the shifting boundary between what we were and what we became. The Petrolona skull has been called many names. Some scholars identified it as Homo erectus, that wandering ancestor who spread from Africa into Asia and Europe nearly 2 million years ago. Others argued it bore the marks of Homo heidelbergensis, the species that gave rise to both Neanderthals and modern humans. Still others thought it was an early Neanderthal itself, a shadow ancestor who adapted to the cold Pleistocene winds of Europe. But the truth is elusive. Each time the skull was studied, the conclusions shifted. Its age was debated fiercely. Early claims suggested it was as old as 700,000 years. Later, through uranium series dating and other methods, the estimate settled closer to 300,000 to 400,000 years. That range alone makes it extraordinary, for it places the skull among the earliest hominin remains in Europe, evidence that ancient humans reached this corner of the Mediterranean long before classical history had begun to stir. The skull rests today in quiet reverence, yet the cave still holds the echoes of its discovery. Imagine it, a skull embedded in the wall, surrounded by dripping calcite, gleaming faintly in the light of a lamp, the eye sockets hollow, like windows into a mind that once gazed across landscapes now long vanished. Outside that cave, the land itself was different then. The ice age chilled the air. Steppe-like plains stretched where olive groves and seaside resorts now stand. Lions padded across the land, along with bears and aurochs. The humans who lived then hunted, gathered and lit fires against the night, their lives precarious yet enduring. What was the Petrolona individual like? The skull suggests a robust, resilient being. The brow ridge was strong, the forehead sloping. The brain capacity, about 1,202 cubic centimeters, was not unlike that of modern humans, though shaped differently. This person, man or woman, lived perhaps in small groups. They knew fire, stone tools, and the rhythms of survival. And yet there is something haunting in how we cannot name them with certainty. Were they Homo heidelbergensis, the ancestor of the Neanderthals? Were they a local population unique to the Aegean, a fragment of humanity cut off by geography and time? Or were they evidence of an earlier migration from Africa, one that textbooks often overlook? The cave where the skull was found also preserved other relics of life. Bones of animals tell us of the hunts and scavenges that may have fed these people. Charcoal remains suggest firelight flickered in its chambers. It is possible that humans used the cave as shelter, returning in winters to its dark refuge. Or perhaps the skull was not a burial at all, but a life ended in accident, a fall into darkness, a death preserved by chance. Debates about its meaning have stirred scholarly circles for decades. In Greece, the skull became almost legendary, a source of national pride but also of academic quarrel. Some researchers argued fiercely for its antiquity, claiming it pushed the timeline of human presence in Europe back farther than accepted. Others were cautious, unwilling to leap beyond the evidence. The Petrolona skull became not only a fossil, but a mirror of human desire to know, to claim, and to belong to deep history. And so the story unfolds slowly, like the dripping of water onto stone. Each drop adds a layer, but never completes the shape. We know the skull is old, older than most artifacts. older than any Greek temple or Minoan fresco, older even than the first flicker of myth that Homer sang. It belonged to someone who lived when the Aegean was raw and wild, when ice pushed south and animals roamed that no Greek of later centuries would ever know. What did this person see, on a clear day, from the hills above Petrolona? Perhaps vast plains where herds grazed. Perhaps the glint of the sea, already eternal. Did they feel the chill wind at night, pulling their furs close? Did they sit around a fire, watching sparks vanish into the dark? Did they tell stories, in a language now lost, shaping sounds that echoed in that cave, and linger still though we cannot hear them? The skull cannot answer. It stares silently, the jaw absent, the teeth worn. It is less a person than a fragment of memory, crystallized in stone. Yet through it, we glimpse not only a single life, but the vastness of human evolution. The cave itself amplifies that sense of mystery. Inside, the chambers stretch with calcite formations that gleam like frozen curtains. The floors crunch underfoot with fossilized remains. Bats wheel in silence, their wings stirring the damp air. For thousands of years, the cave kept its secrets. Even after the skull was found, other bones and traces were unearthed, each one a puzzle piece without a full picture. Visitors to the Petrolona cave today walk through illuminated pathways, their eyes adjusting to the glow of electric light. Guides speak softly of its age, of the Ice Age animals entombed here. But deep within, where the skull once lay embedded, one feels the weight of time differently. The silence is thicker, the darkness deeper. It is as if the cave remembers the presence of its ancient occupant. There is poetry in how such a discovery challenges us. The Petrolona skull reminds us that our lineage is not a straight line. It is a branching tree, with limbs that twist, with branches that break. We like to think of ourselves as the inevitable outcome of evolution, but fossils like this whisper otherwise. There were many ways to be human, some endured, some vanished. The Petrolona individual lived, breathed, walked and died, and their kind is gone, leaving only bone and speculation. And still, there is comfort in imagining them not as an enigma, but as kin. To picture them gathering food, tending fire, watching the skies. To know that across hundreds of thousands of years, some things never change. The warmth of flame, the taste of food, the comfort of companionship. The Petrolona skull is distant, but not alien. It is, in its silence, still family. And so the cave remains, in Greece's hills, a chamber where past and present meet. Travelers pass through, marveling at its glittering stone curtains, its frozen drips of calcite, its preserved bones. But somewhere within its heart lingers the hollow gaze of a skull that has seen more winters than we can count, a witness not to history, but to prehistory itself. The Petrolona skull is not simply a fossil. It is a story without an ending, a question without an answer, a reminder that beneath the soil, behind the rock, under the flow of time, there are always more lives waiting to be remembered. The Kemble Roman Boundary Stone. The Kemble Roman Boundary Stone rests in quiet obscurity, and yet it carries with it the echo of a world where empires brushed shoulders, where languages merged and clashed, and where the very earth was divided by lines of power, ritual, and law. Shaped from basalt, the dark volcanic stone stands as a reminder that the past was never simple. It was layered, complicated, endlessly shifting. To hold such a stone in your gaze is to look not just at a boundary, but at the meeting point of worlds. This marker was uncovered in the land that has always been a crossroads, the land of Israel, where the Mediterranean meets the desert, where caravans once marched, where soldiers from distant empires came to build roads, plant banners, and measure fields. Carved into the stone are inscriptions that make it unlike many others of its kind. For not only do they contain Greek, the language of administration across the Roman East, but also Hebrew, the language of a people with roots far deeper in the soil than the empire that then claimed dominion. It is this duality, this blending of tongues and traditions, that makes the stone extraordinary. A basalt pillar, once set upright to mark a division, whether between fields, between towns, between sacred lands, or between the territories of empire, it carries not just words, but meanings that ripple outward. One can imagine a Roman official, perhaps dispatched from a provincial capital, overseeing its placement. Alongside him might stand a local elder, speaking Hebrew, ensuring that the land of his ancestors was recognized, measured, recorded. Between them, a scribe carves words into the hard volcanic surface. Words in both languages, an act both administrative and symbolic. To understand the Kemble Roman boundary stone, one must begin with its material. Basalt is not a stone that yields easily. It is born of fire, hardened lava, volcanic rock that cooled into toughness. It was abundant in the region, especially across the Golan and the Galilee, and thus often chosen for monuments meant to endure. But the act of inscribing basalt is no small feat. It requires labor, skill, and intent. This was no casual boundary marker, placed without thought. To etch names, titles, or measurements into such a stone was a declaration of permanence. When first rediscovered, the stone appeared almost plain, yet, upon careful study, faint lines emerged. Letters cut deep, softened by centuries of weather. Scholars were startled to recognize not one script, but two. The Greek words, as expected, carried the language of Roman provincial governance, formulaic, administrative, perhaps naming an official or identifying a decree of division. But alongside them, Hebrew letters spoke in another voice. Their shapes were older, echoing traditions of inscription that reached back long before Rome. Together, the languages told a story of overlapping authority, of coexistence and contest. What did the Hebrew mean? Did it echo the same message as the Greek, a translation to ensure that locals understood the decree? Or did it carry another layer of meaning, a subtle assertion of identity beneath the cloak of empire? These are questions that continue to stir debate. Boundary stones in the Roman world were not mere markers of property. They were imbued with legal and sacred power. To cross or move a boundary stone unjustly was to commit a crime, not only against one's neighbor but against the gods and the order of the state. Latin inscriptions elsewhere often invoked curses upon those who tampered with such stones. In the East, where Greek predominated, the language changed, but the weight of the act did not. A stone placed in the earth was a contract, binding space and time, sanctioned by the empire, and often by divine appeal. And yet, here in Israel, where traditions of land, covenant, and sacred promise ran deep, the stone resonated differently. The Hebrew letters suggest that the land itself spoke in two registers. One spoke in the tongue of Caesar's governors, measuring land by decree and law. The other spoke in the language of a people whose connection to soil was older, more intimate, bound not by imperial edict, but by ancestral covenant. We must imagine the lives around this stone. Perhaps it stood on a road between villages, where shepherds passed with their flocks and merchants with their wares. Perhaps children played near its base, throwing pebbles against its dark side, never thinking of the weight it carried. Perhaps disputes arose near it, as farmers argued about where one field ended and another began. And perhaps elders pointed to the inscriptions, invoking the authority of the stone itself to settle disagreements. For centuries it remained. Basalt does not crumble quickly. The wind and rain softened its edges, but the letters lingered. Empires shifted. Rome gave way to Byzantium. Byzantium yielded to caliphates. Yet the stone endured, silent, half-buried, a witness to transformations. When it was finally uncovered in modern times, scholars gathered to read its voices. They marveled that a single stone could carry such linguistic duality. Some wondered, was this an act of pragmatism, ensuring both Roman officials and local inhabitants could understand? Or was it symbolic, a recognition that no single language could fully command the land? In the quiet of study rooms, the inscriptions were traced, compared to other finds. Greek inscriptions abounded in the Roman East, as did Hebrew texts upon ossuaries, scrolls, and menorah carvings, but seldom did the two meet in so direct and physical a manner. The Kembel Roman boundary stone thus became a touchstone for discussions of cultural entanglement. It reminds us that borders were not merely lines upon a map, they were lived realities. A boundary stone is as much about people as it is about land. It speaks of encounters between farmers and officials, between traditions and laws, between empire and ancestry. Each letter cut into the basalt is a testament to negotiation, to compromise, to the complexity of life in a land that has always known overlapping claims. As one gazes upon the stone today, one can almost feel the hands that carved it, the hammer striking the chisel, the sparks flying as metal met basalt. The careful shaping of letters, each line requiring strength and patience, the decision of which words to include, which language to inscribe, and behind these acts the quiet insistence of people and power, each leaving their mark. The basalt itself seems to hum with memory. It carries not only inscriptions but the heat of the volcano that birthed it, the sun that beat down upon it for centuries, the rains that traced its surface, the soil that slowly covered and revealed it again. To rest a hand upon it is to touch a fragment of Earth's fire, shaped by human hands into meaning. In the end, the Kembel Roman boundary stone is not simply an artifact. It is a story in stone, a reminder that history is written not only in books but in the ground beneath our feet. A reminder that empires and peoples meet, not always in battle, but sometimes in a shared carving upon basalt. And that even after millennia, those meetings can still speak, still whisper, still ask us to listen. It stands as a patient teacher, telling us that boundaries are never only about division, they are about connection too. The connection of languages, of traditions, of the endless human desire to inscribe meaning upon the earth. And so the stone remains, carrying with it not just Hebrew and Greek words, but the resonance of every step, every voice, every hand that passed near it, in a land where the stones themselves seem to remember. The Mahavira sculpture. In the humid warmth of southern India, amid temples rising like mountains of stone, there exists a figure whose silence has endured for 1,000 years. It is carved not from fragile clay, nor hammered in bronze, but hewn from enduring granite, a sculpture of Mahavira, the last great teacher of Jainism. The idol, tall and austere, is marked with faint but still discernible inscriptions, lines scratched in Tamil, Sanskrit, and Prakrit, languages once alive in the conversations of kings, scholars, and monks. The story of this sculpture begins in the Chola period, an era spanning from the 9th to the 13th centuries. The Cholas are remembered for their mighty bronze icons of Shiva as Nataraja, the cosmic dancer, yet scattered through the lands they ruled are Jain relics, subtler, less celebrated, and often forgotten. Among these relics, the Mahavira idol stands apart, not only for its form, but for the unusual inscriptions at its base. The statue depicts Mahavira in Kayotsarga, the posture of abandonment. His body is upright and straight, his arms hang downward beside his thighs, his eyes are half closed in meditation. Unlike the lavish bronze Natarajas cast in the same century, this idol bears no ornaments. There are no jeweled crowns, no anklets, no earrings, only the unclothed stillness of renunciation. His face is neither stern nor gentle, but inexpressive, resting beyond human moods. Yet it is not the form alone that compels attention. Across the pedestal, faint letters have been traced, inscriptions worn by time but still legible to the trained eye. They mention donors, patrons with Jain names, men and women of merchant families who must have supported the carving of this figure. In one corner, a name appears in a mixture of Tamil and Prakrit, invoking blessings for one who sought merit by raising the form of the Jina. In another, a verse in Sanskrit meters praises Mahavira as the conqueror of time and passion. Curiously, the inscription also includes a short fragment in Grantha script, the writing system used by South Indian scribes to record Sanskrit sounds that Tamil letters could not capture. What emerges is a palimpsest of cultures, Jain devotion expressed in the languages of southern India, written in scripts that were themselves inventions of adaptation. The idol is not only a sculpture of Mahavira, but a living record of the linguistic, religious, and cultural world of its time. Archaeologists first documented this sculpture in the late 19th century, when colonial surveyors recorded ruins across the Tamil country. But their notes were brief, often dismissive. They paid little attention to Jain idols, considering them marginal in comparison with grand Shaiva or Vaishnava temples. The Mahavira sculpture, once worshipped daily, slipped into obscurity, visited only by a dwindling Jain community and occasional travelers who wandered into the old shrine where it stood. For more than a century it remained there, weathered by monsoon rains and the brushing touch of countless hands. The surface grew smoother, the letters shallower, yet the form endured, a silent witness to centuries of neglect. In recent decades, however, scholars have returned to study it anew. Epigraphists, experts in ancient writing, have traced the letters, noting their peculiar mixture of forms. Some letters are unmistakably Chola-era Tamil, their strokes sharp and angular. Others are Prakrit syllables, rare in the Tamil region but known to have been used by Jain communities. And then there are Sanskrit verses, written in the rhythm of classical poetry, as though even amidst local devotion, patrons sought to place their act within the larger framework of pan-Indian learning. This mixture has led to much debate. Was the idol sponsored by a purely Jain community, or did it involve patrons of different faiths? Was it carved in a temple that stood alongside Kola shrines, coexisting in the same sacred landscape? Some argue that the inscriptions reveal multilingual devotion, a mark of how Jainism survived in Tamil lands, not by isolation but by dialogue with surrounding traditions. Others suggest it reflects the gradual marginalization of Jainism in the Kola period, its followers adopting local forms, scripts, and languages to survive in a society increasingly dominated by Hindu institutions. The form of Mahavira in Kayotsarga deserves its own attention. To stand motionless, exposed, and unornamented is a gesture that defies the ordinary human body. The monks of Jainism practiced ahimsa, non-violence, to its extreme, renouncing clothing, wealth, and even food taken with attachment. The posture carved into stone expresses this abandonment. To meditate standing, without moving, until one becomes insensible to pain, hunger, or fatigue, that was the aspiration of Jain ascetics. Thus the idol is not a deity to be adored with gifts, but a mirror of detachment. Its message is not worship me, but become free as I have become free. Unlike Hindu deities, whose idols are bathed, dressed, and ornamented, Jain idols like this one stand untouched by ritual elaboration. The inscriptions show that donors raised it out of devotion, but once it was made, it demanded nothing. Its silence was its sermon. The Kola period, however, was not easy for Jainism. Centuries earlier, Jainism had flourished in Tamil lands, producing the Tamil classics like the Silappatikaram and Tirukkural. Jain monks had been patrons of literature, philosophy, and grammar. But by the 11th century, the Kola kings were patrons of Shaifism. Temples, monasteries, and festivals dedicated to Shiva rose everywhere. Jain monasteries declined. Some were converted, others abandoned. In this shifting landscape, the Mahavira sculpture may represent one of the last great efforts of Tamil Jains to preserve their tradition in stone. One can imagine the scene of its dedication: a small group of merchants, wealthy enough to commission stone carvers, bringing offerings to the site. The carvers, accustomed to sculpting Hindu icons, adapted their skills to shape the austere figure of Mahavira. The patrons dictated inscriptions in several tongues, ensuring that their devotion would be recorded for any pilgrim who came across it, whether he read Tamil, Prakrit, or Sanskrit. For a time, perhaps the site was busy. Monks recited scriptures, pilgrims offered lamps, and laypeople came to gaze at the idol. But as centuries passed, the shrine faded from prominence. The sculpture was left to itself until even its name was forgotten in the villages around it. Modern scholars continue to puzzle over certain details. Some note that the iconography of the idol differs slightly from northern Jain examples. Mahavira here is less emaciated, his ribs not carved, his body smoother, closer to the South Indian aesthetic of idealized form. This blending of austerity with idealized beauty might reflect the artistic values of the Kola sculptors, who were accustomed to portraying gods in perfected human shapes. It is as though Jain devotion insisted on renunciation, but Kola artistry insisted on proportion and harmony, producing a synthesis that belongs uniquely to this region. Others point to the inscription's curious mention of boundaries, phrases that suggest the idol was raised on land marked off for Jain worship, distinct from neighboring Hindu temples. Did tensions exist between communities, or was it simply a legal declaration, ensuring that future generations would respect the sanctity of the shrine? We cannot know for certain. The letters are broken, their meaning incomplete. What remains, however, is the sense of a forgotten dialogue, a conversation between faiths, languages, and patrons now reduced to faint scratches on stone. Today, the Mahavira idol sits in semi-obscurity. Some are preserved in museums, others still stand in dilapidated village shrines. To see it is to encounter not only the figure of a spiritual teacher, but also the echoes of centuries of neglect and rediscovery. Dust gathers on its shoulders, moss creeps along its base, yet the inscriptions remain, as though waiting for someone to ask their meaning. The sculpture is not only an artifact but a question: how do religions endure or vanish? How do communities carve their devotion into stone, only to have later generations walk past without noticing? And how can a figure of silence, carved 1,000 years ago, still whisper across centuries? Perhaps that is its most enduring mystery. The Mahavira sculpture speaks not in words but in absence, the absence of adornment, the absence of desire, the absence of noise, and yet, standing before it, one feels the weight of presence, the weight of those who once believed enough to commission it, the weight of the languages carved into its base, the weight of the unbroken stone that has outlasted dynasties, empires, and even memory. The sculpture endures, a Kola-era relic that refuses to vanish, a Jain idol whose silence is louder than the temples that once surrounded it. The Clovis Point. Long before cities rose from stone, before the first fields of wheat bent in the wind, there were people moving silently across the great expanse of a continent newly discovered by human feet. They left behind little that could speak of them with clarity. No written words, no walls of carved monuments, but they left behind a tool of such skill, such remarkable craftsmanship, that it still catches the eye thousands of years later. The Clovis Point, a sliver of shaped stone, a sharp memory from more than 12,000 years ago, lying buried beneath layers of time. A point chipped and fluted with care, meant to pierce the hide of the largest beasts ever to walk North America. It lies at the threshold between survival and extinction, between myth and history, between the first great hunters and the vanishing world of ice and giant creatures. And as we turn our attention toward it, in a quiet drift of thought, we can imagine ourselves stepping into that deep age, moving slowly, following the lives of those who once carried it, held it, relied on it, and perhaps even revered it. Picture the land as it was. The great ice sheets that had gripped the continent were retreating, their edges dripping with meltwater, sending rivers coursing across plains. Forests spread where once there had been only frozen silence. Herds of mammoth wandered, their tusks sweeping arcs in the air, their feet pressing wide tracks into the earth. Mastodons moved among them, shorter, stockier, feeding on the bark of trees. Enormous bison gathered in groups that darkened the horizon. Horses, wild and unshod, thundered across grasslands, and predators, too, prowled in this living world. The saber-toothed cat, crouched in silence, its long teeth gleaming, the dire wolf, heavier and broader than the wolves we know today, even bears larger than any that roam now, capable of standing taller than a man astride a horse. Into this landscape came the Paleo-Indian hunters, carrying with them points of stone that they had fashioned from carefully chosen rock. The Clovis point is not large, some are barely a few inches long, but in the hand of a hunter, attached to the shaft of a spear, it was deadly, efficient, and reliable. To make one was no simple matter. A piece of flint or chert had to be found, a rock that would break with predictability, flaking in sharp edges. The napper, as we would call them now, struck with a hammerstone, knocking away flakes in long, controlled strikes, shaping the blade from both sides. It was a task that demanded patience, skill, and knowledge, handed down through generations. And then, most distinctively, came the fluting, the removal of a long, slender flake from the base, thinning the stone, allowing it to be bound more securely to a spear shaft. One miscalculated strike, and the point might shatter, days of work lost in an instant. But when done well, the Clovis point was elegant, symmetrical, sharp enough to pierce hide and muscle, strong enough to withstand impact. It was a marvel of its age, and even now archaeologists admire the precision of its makers. Imagine for a moment the quiet concentration of that napper. He sits cross-legged on the ground, a core of stone before him, chips scattered in the dirt around him. The sound is steady. Tap, tap, a louder strike, a careful pause. His eyes are fixed on the surface of the stone, seeing where the next flake must fall. He holds in his mind the form of the tool not yet complete, guiding his hands with memory and instinct. Around him, others sit. Women scraping hides, children watching curiously, the faint smell of smoke rising from a nearby fire. In this small scene lies the whole world of their survival. The Clovis point was not a decoration. It was not made for ritual display. It was meant to feed a people, to bring down the animals whose meat, hide, and bone would sustain them. Without it, the hunt would falter. With it, they thrived. The people we call Clovis are not a single tribe, not a nation as we might imagine. They are more like a way of life, a culture spread across vast distances, from the plains of Texas to the deserts of New Mexico, from the rolling hills of the east to the valleys of the west. Everywhere archaeologists have dug, they have found echoes of these points. They seem to appear suddenly, across the continent, as if knowledge of how to make them spread like fire in dry grass, and then, just as suddenly, they vanish, replaced by other styles, other ways of life. For a few hundred years, perhaps 1,000, the Clovis point was supreme, and then it was gone. Why? That question lingers. Perhaps the great animals that these hunters pursued began to die out, victims of changing climate as the Ice Age ended. Or perhaps hunted beyond recovery. Perhaps the people themselves shifted to new ways of living, adapting to new landscapes, smaller game, new plants to gather. The Clovis point remains like a frozen heartbeat, a moment preserved in stone. Consider one such moment. A group of hunters stalk a mammoth, their breath clouding in the cold morning air. The animal looms ahead, massive, its ears twitching, its trunk lifting to scent the wind. The hunters circle, moving with caution, their spears tipped with points that gleam faintly in the light. At a signal, they surge forward, spears thrown with force, the points driving deep. The mammoth bellows, staggering, blood marking its fur. More spears fly, more cries ring out. At last the beast collapses, the ground trembling as it falls. For the hunters, triumph. For the people, food for weeks, hide for shelter, bone for tools. And buried somewhere in that scene, beneath the dust and blood, a point may break, may fall aside, and lie forgotten. Thousands of years later, an archaeologist bends to brush away soil, and the stone emerges once again, still sharp, still perfect. The Clovis point tells us something subtle about its makers. It speaks of planning, of shared knowledge, of communities large enough to sustain and teach one another. It suggests not just survival, but a kind of artistry, an attention to form as well as function. The symmetry of the points is striking, the lines clean and balanced. These were not rough tools made in haste. They were crafted with pride. When we hold one today, turning it in our hands, we are touching the thoughts of someone who lived 12,000 years ago. The connection is immediate, intimate. A hand then, a hand now, both feeling the same edges. Yet beyond admiration, there is mystery. We know so little about the people themselves. We do not know the names they gave themselves, the words they spoke, the stories they told around their fires. We do not know the songs they sang, or the fears that filled their nights. All we have are these points, scattered like breadcrumbs across the land, and from them we try to build a picture. Some say the Clovis people were the first to settle the Americas. Others argue they were simply one among many, their tool style the most enduring, the most visible in the archaeological record. Debate continues, evidence shifting, new discoveries always rewriting the story, but the point remains, silent, waiting, its edges as sharp as the questions it raises. Think of the places where they have been found. In New Mexico, the site where a boy once dug into a mammoth bone and uncovered points still embedded within. In Texas, cash is buried deliberately, as if for safekeeping, bundles of points hidden away, never retrieved. In Montana, alongside the remains of children, laid carefully with offerings, each site a whisper, a fragment, each stone tool, a message carried across time. And so, as you let your thoughts drift, imagine lying down on the earth where once they walked. The stars above are the same, though perhaps brighter than, untouched by city lights. The air is colder, sharper, scented with grass and smoke. You hear the distant thunder of hooves, the cries of wolves, the rush of water from a glacial stream. You close your eyes, and in your hand you feel the smooth, fluted surface of a Clovis point, light yet strong, a piece of stone transformed by human will. It is both simple and profound, a shard of the past that bridges the vast silence between their world and ours. And as the night deepens, and the fire burns low, the stone lies beside you, a reminder that even in the earliest days, humans carried with them not just the instinct to survive, but the skill to shape the world with their hands, to leave behind something enduring. The Clovis point is small, but in its edges are written the beginnings of history, the first lines of a story still unfolding. It rests in soil and memory, waiting quietly, as the long passage of time continues, unhurried, unbroken, like the rhythm of sleep itself. The Jigaru pottery. On the northeastern coast of Australia, where the turquoise sea folds against the ragged cliffs of Jigaru, an island more often called Lizard Island by later visitors, there exists a silence that feels older than the winds that pass across the Great Barrier Reef. It is here, on the stony shoulders of the island, that shards of earthenware pottery have been uncovered. These fragments, fragile yet enduring, whisper of hands that once shaped clay long before written records, before the reach of colonial maps, before anyone thought to call this vast continent Australia. The pottery is known today as the Jigaru pottery, and its quiet presence in the archaeological soil stirs a deep, lingering curiosity about the lives of the first peoples who walked these shores tens of thousands of years ago. When you picture the island, imagine the coral sands, pale and fine, stretching in small coves. Mangroves cluster where the tides bring nutrients, their roots twisting like the fingers of old spirits, filtering the sea into freshwater channels. Above them rise slopes scattered with stones, their surfaces darkened by the salt spray of countless storms. Jigaru itself is not immense, but it is a place of vantage, an island whose cliffs give sweeping views of the reef below. For Aboriginal groups it was a stepping stone, a place of story, a meeting point between ocean and land. And in the earth here, archaeologists uncovered pottery that should not have existed, not in this place, not in this time, according to old assumptions. For decades, the prevailing understanding was that the Aboriginal peoples of ancient Australia were masterful in art, in tool-making, in fire management, but that pottery traditions, unlike those of Asia, Africa, or the Americas, were not part of their lifeways. Pottery was thought unnecessary for mobile hunter-gatherers, whose containers were crafted from wood, bark, gourds, or woven grasses. Yet Jigaru revealed something unexpected: shards of clay vessels, fired in simple but effective ways, carrying the impressions of ancient makers. The shards were small, often no larger than the palm of a hand. Some bore faint incisions, others were smooth, but all carried the reddish hue of clay, baked in fire. The dating placed them at several thousand years old, a startling revelation, suggesting that Aboriginal groups here experimented with earthenware in ways once thought impossible. Some scholars speculated that the tradition was localized, tied to island life, where clay was plentiful and the sea demanded vessels that could withstand salt and heat. Others suggested that influences from neighboring Melanesian cultures, across the Torres Strait, may have flowed southward into Australia. But for many Aboriginal elders, the pottery was not foreign at all. It was part of their deep, unbroken connection to land and story. When you linger on Jigaru in thought, you can almost hear the rhythms of an ancient camp. Fires flicker on the shoreline, their embers glowing against the night sea. Children gather shells, sorting them into piles. Elders speak in soft voices, telling stories of the reef's creation, how the great spirits carved pathways in coral and guided fish into the channels. Women shape clay with their hands, smoothing the edges with water, creating vessels not of luxury but of necessity. Pots for boiling shellfish, for carrying, perhaps even for ceremonial uses. The scent of smoke mingles with salt air, and the pottery hardens, transforming from soft earth into durable form. Archaeologists approach the shards with their usual tools: carbon dating, comparative typology, microscopic analysis of clay grains. They trace the origins of the material to local deposits, proving that the vessels were indeed native to Jigaru. Some pieces showed burn marks, the signature of open-fire kilns dug shallow into the sand. Others carried residues, faint traces of what might once have been plant starches or animal fats. This was not mere accident. This was deliberate craft, honed by experience, carried by tradition. Yet what lingers most is not the scientific puzzle, but the atmosphere of the island itself. Jigoru is more than a site, it is a living place, and in Aboriginal cosmology, it is woven with ancestral stories that are as enduring as the stones. To walk upon it is to tread on layers of time, each step bringing you into quiet conversation with the past. Imagine the sea at dawn, when the horizon bleeds into pale light. The pottery shards, buried just beneath the soil, lie hidden as seabirds wheel above. The waves lap gently against the rocks, repeating a rhythm that has not changed in tens of millennia. And somewhere beneath that quiet rhythm, human voices once echoed. Voices shaping clay, voices cooking food, voices telling children of the spirits that guard the reef. The pottery fragments bridge worlds. They connect the tangible with the intangible, the material with the story. For Aboriginal knowledge systems, objects are never just objects. They are vessels of meaning, links to ancestors, manifestations of dreaming. A shard of pottery, though small, carries with it the echo of those who made it, the intention of use, the surrounding song of the land. In sleepful thought, you might imagine the vessel whole again. Picture it lifted from the fire, warm, steaming with the food it carried. See it passed from hand to hand, a tool in daily life, yet also a part of ceremony, of community, of connection. Then imagine it breaking, accidentally perhaps, or deliberately discarded after long use. The fragments fall to the ground, covered slowly by layers of sand and leaf. Centuries pass, storms erode, winds shift, and the pieces remain hidden until uncovered by new seekers who try to interpret what was never lost to those who carried the knowledge in story. The Jigoru pottery reshapes more than archaeology. It reshapes how we think of human ingenuity. It tells us that Aboriginal people were never static, never confined to simplistic roles. They experimented, adapted, innovated. They created pottery not because it was expected, but because it suited the rhythms of life in that moment, in that place. Perhaps the tradition was brief, fading as mobility and other technologies proved more fitting. Perhaps it lingered longer than fragments suggest, in forms we have not yet uncovered. But it was there, and its presence is undeniable. As you imagine the island more deeply, you might see how time folds upon itself. The pottery is both ancient and immediate, both broken and whole. The reef surrounding Jigoru hums with life, fish gliding in schools, turtles surfacing for air, corals branching like frozen lightning. Above it all, the pottery rests in silence, a human imprint among the natural cycles. It waits not for discovery, but for recognition. The shards remind us that even in the vast expanse of time, even in the seeming stillness of a remote island, people lived, loved, created, and adapted. Their hands shaped clay, their fires baked it, their stories carried it. And though the vessels themselves are broken, their presence holds together a narrative that refuses to fade. When you drift into thought, imagine yourself walking barefoot across Jigoru's sands at dusk. The air cools as the sun lowers, painting the horizon with orange and violet. You stoop and pick up a fragment half buried in the soil. It feels smooth, yet rough at the edges, its surface baked hard. For a moment, you feel the warmth of the fire that once made it. You hear the laughter of those gathered around, the crackle of burning wood, the soft lap of the tide. And then the sound fades, the fragment slips through your fingers, and you let it rest again in the earth. The Jigoru pottery is a reminder that history is not always where we expect it. It is not only in the grand ruins or the towering monuments, but in the fragile shards of clay, in the whispers of land and sea. It invites us to slow down, to listen, to see beyond the surface. And as you settle deeper into stillness, the pottery rests too, timeless, unbroken in meaning, carried forward by story, by land, by memory. And so, in the long quiet of night, the island endures. The waves keep their rhythm, the pottery remains, its fragments scattered like stars fallen into the soil, waiting to be remembered, waiting to remind us of the hands that once shaped them in firelight long ago. The Vadnagar glass beads. In the soft light of early morning, the town of Vadnagar stirs, as it has for thousands of years. Today it is known as a quiet settlement in Gujarat, its streets crossed by travelers, its walls worn smooth by countless footsteps. But hidden beneath its dust, within layers of earth and history, lie small treasures that whisper of forgotten lives. They are not vast palaces, nor monumental temples, nor colossal sculptures. Instead, they are delicate, almost fragile, tiny glass beads, shimmering faintly when uncovered, but carrying within them the weight of millennia. Archaeologists call them the Vadnagar glass beads. At first glance, they might seem insignificant, just small, colored fragments of decoration. Yet as one looks closer, as one allows the mind to drift back through time, their significance becomes clear. These beads are not just ornaments. They are the record of human desire, for beauty, for connection, for trade, for storytelling. And as the story unfolds, bead by bead, it becomes a story of the world itself. Imagine one of these beads resting in the palm of your hand. It is smooth, worn by centuries, perhaps with a faint translucence that catches the light. How far has this little piece of glass traveled? Who once held it, treasured it, or traded it? What stories did it silently witness, across oceans, deserts, and crowded bazaars? To understand the Vadnagar beads, one must drift back to the origins of glass itself. Glassmaking was not native to India. Instead, the art began in Mesopotamia and Egypt, places where fire and sand met in experiments of alchemy. From there, glass spread outward, carried in caravans and ships. By the time it reached India, perhaps 3,000 years ago, it had already been transformed into something precious, something exotic, rare, and deeply desired. But India, with its long traditions of craft, did not merely receive the art, it reimagined it. In the bustling trade hubs along its western coast, artisans began to experiment, shaping beads not just as decoration, but as currency, as symbols of identity, and as vehicles for meaning. Vadnagar, situated on the crossroads of important trade routes, became one of these quiet laboratories of history. Here beads were made, traded, worn, lost, buried, and rediscovered. Each one is a frozen droplet of time. Close your eyes and picture Vadnagar not as it is today, but as it might have been 2,000 years ago. The town hums with life. Merchants arrive with caravans loaded with spices, textiles, ivory, and precious stones. Ships dock at distant harbors like Baruch, their sails heavy with goods from Arabia, Rome, and beyond. Traders make their way inland, bringing with them foreign treasures, coral from the Red Sea, glass from the Mediterranean, perfumes from Arabia, and among these treasures, beads, shimmering, multicolored, endlessly portable. In the open markets, children marvel at their glow. Women thread them into necklaces, bracelets, or anklets, letting them catch the sun as they walk. Priests string them into sacred talismans. Merchants measure their worth not just in gold or silver, but in how many beads can be exchanged. Beads are universal. They fit in every culture, slip easily into every hand, and appeal to a desire deeper than words, the human longing for beauty in miniature form. But Vadnagar beads are not only beautiful, they are clues. Archaeologists discovered that the glass beads found here span millennia of history, dating from as early as the 2nd century BCE up until the medieval period. Their styles shift with time. Some are deep blue, echoing the lapis lazuli of distant Afghanistan. Some are striped or dotted, suggesting influences from Roman millefiori techniques. Some are simple, others elaborate. Each type marks a chapter in the story of cultural exchange. Pause here and think about this. A bead made in Vadnagar may have traveled thousands of kilometers, across deserts by camel, across oceans by ship, across mountains on muleback. Some beads ended up in Southeast Asia, others in Africa, still others as far away as Europe. Archaeologists have found Indian beads in Viking burials in Scandinavia, a silent testament to the global threads of connection that stretched long before the modern world. And in return, Vadnagar received beads from other lands, incorporating foreign artistry into local craft. When you imagine these beads crossing the world, you imagine the fingers that touched them. A Roman trader, marveling at their colors under Mediterranean sunlight, an African chief, stringing them into regalia, a Buddhist monk, carrying them as offerings along the Silk Road, and somewhere in Vadnagar, an artisan shaping molten glass, unaware that his small creation would one day lie buried in foreign soil, far from home, a survivor of time itself. The making of the beads was itself an art of patience. Picture a small workshop in ancient Vadnagar. A furnace glows orange with heat. Sand, soda, and lime are melted, sometimes mixed with fragments of recycled glass. Metallic oxides are added to create color. Cobalt for blue, copper for green, manganese for purple, iron for brown. The molten glass is then drawn into thin rods which are cut into tiny cylinders. These are reheated, shaped, and polished until they become smooth and symmetrical. Some are wound around rods, others pressed into molds. The process is delicate, requiring steady hands and keen eyes, and always the beads are made not in isolation, but as part of a larger story. Each one is destined to leave its maker's hands. Some will be treasured, others traded, some lost, others buried as offerings to gods. In their journeys, they carry the silent record of human interaction. In Vadnagar, archaeologists uncovered entire caches of beads, as if merchants once stored them in bulk, waiting for sale. Some were found in graves, buried with their owners as symbols of wealth or status. Others were discovered in temple ruins, perhaps once used in ritual offerings, and still more were scattered across everyday sites, dropped, lost, and forgotten, tiny accidents of history that now help reconstruct a forgotten world. Think of a single bead, buried for centuries. Darkness surrounds it, soil presses down, season after season. Monsoons pass overhead, dynasties rise and fall, empires collapse. Yet the bead remains, untouched, unbroken, its surface waiting for the day when curious hands will unearth it once again. The beads remind us of something simple yet profound, that history is not only written in grand monuments, but in small, delicate objects. A bead is humble, but it speaks of the same forces that shape civilizations: trade, culture, migration, and memory. And perhaps in their smallness, beads are even more powerful. They are personal, intimate. They were worn against skin, carried close to the body, passed from hand to hand. They are history at its most human scale. As you drift deeper into this story, imagine yourself in Vadnagar, long ago. You walk through its narrow lanes, the air filled with the scent of spices and the sound of barter. You hear foreign tongues blending with local dialects. You see a merchant displaying beads on a cloth, their colors dazzling in the sun. You reach out, pick one up, and feel its smoothness against your fingers. In that moment you are part of a chain that stretches across centuries. You do not know it yet, but the bead you hold will one day rest in a museum case, centuries later, whispering of your life to people you cannot imagine. This is the secret of the Vadnagar glass beads. They are not only artifacts, they are storytellers. They remind us that history is a thread, fragile, luminous, and unbroken, woven through the smallest of things. And as you picture these tiny beads scattered across the earth, glowing faintly in memory, let yourself drift further into stillness. The beads have traveled far enough. Now they rest, and so can you. The Tel Banat Memorial. In the vastness of northern Syria, where the Euphrates River once curved across fertile plains like a ribbon of shimmering silver, there stands a mound. At first glance, it might seem no different than the countless other mounds that dot the ancient landscapes of Mesopotamia, heaps of dust, earth and stone concealing the layers of forgotten towns and long-buried settlements. But this one, Tel Banat, holds something unique. It is not simply the remains of a village or a palace, not merely the ruins of a temple or a trading post. Instead, it carries with it the weight of memory, a place where thousands of years ago, the living gathered to honor the dead. It is a memorial mound, one of the oldest known war monuments in the world. To understand Tel Banat, you must first picture the land as it was around 2500 BCE, nearly 4,500 years ago. This was a region of rivers and caravan tracks, of scattered towns connected by fragile alliances and rivalries. Life pulsed in the villages that sprang up along the river's banks, farmers tending their barley, herders guiding flocks of sheep and goats, potters shaping clay into storage jars, and children racing barefoot through dusty lanes. Yet alongside these everyday rhythms, there was always the looming presence of conflict. Small-scale wars broke out between towns, raids carried away flocks, and settlements were burned. It was an age of competition, but also one of remembrance. For in the midst of these struggles, the people of Tel Banat built something extraordinary, a mound for the fallen. The mound itself rises like a silent wave of earth, smoother and more deliberate than the natural hills surrounding it. Archaeologists who have dug into its layers have found evidence of careful construction, layer upon layer of compacted soil, interlaced with gravel and ash. It was not the accidental buildup of centuries of habitation, but a planned and purposeful creation. Each layer seems to mark an episode, an addition, as though the community gathered time and again to expand their monument, and within it, scattered like fragments of a long-forgotten song, are the burials of men, women, and even children. Some are whole, carefully laid to rest. Others are partial, bones intermingled with soil, reminders of lives lost in violent moments. The most striking discovery within Tel Banat came in the form of what researchers called the White Monument. Unlike the usual earthen mounds of the region, this one was built from pale gypsum, giving it a bright, almost ghostly sheen in the desert sunlight. Imagine it thousands of years ago, gleaming white against the horizon, a landmark visible for miles around. To the people who built it, it must have seemed like a beacon, both a warning and a remembrance, declaring that here lay the honored dead, and that their memory was not to be erased. But who were these people whose remains were placed within the mound? Some scholars suggest that they were soldiers, casualties of battles fought in the shifting struggles of early city-states. Others argue that the burials were more communal, reflecting disasters, raids, or moments of violence that struck entire groups. The truth may lie somewhere between. What seems clear is that Tel Banat was not about individual glory. There are no grand tombs, no golden ornaments, no names carved into stone. Instead, the memorial speaks of collective memory. These were the fallen of a community, remembered not for who they were as individuals, but for what their deaths meant to those who survived. If you imagine a ritual at the site, it might have unfolded slowly, in the heat of a late afternoon. Villagers and townsfolk would climb the mound, carrying baskets of soil to add another layer, or perhaps the remains of those newly lost to battle. There might have been chants, offerings of grain or milk poured into the earth, the sound of flutes or drums echoing faintly across the plain. Children, wide-eyed and curious, would have watched as their elders shaped the mound higher. each gesture a binding of the community to its past. And when the ceremony ended, the white monument would stand a little taller, its pale walls catching the fading light. What is most haunting about Tel Benat is that it blurs the line between life and death, between history and memory. It was not just a cemetery, for it was too deliberate, too monumental. It was not just a fortification, though its presence certainly sent a message of strength. It was a reminder, an eternal one, that those who lived in this land saw their struggles, their losses, and their shared identity as worth enshrining in stone and soil. When modern archaeologists uncovered the mound, they found more than bones and gypsum. They found layers of meaning. The burials, some of them incomplete, suggest episodes of violence, limbs torn, skulls fractured, yet they also suggest healing, for the dead were gathered and laid together with care. In this, we see the heart of Tel Benat's story, not merely a record of war, but a record of remembrance, of the resilience of people who chose to build memory into the very landscape. As the Euphrates shifts its course, and the desert winds sweep dust across the ruins, Tel Benat remains, a whisper from 4.5 millennia ago. The white monument still speaks in its silence, its pale stones faded but not forgotten. It tells us that long before written chronicles, long before grand kings and empires, ordinary communities sought to keep the memory of their dead alive. And so, as you let your mind wander across that ancient landscape, picture the mound rising gently against the horizon, its white surface catching the light. Picture the people gathered, carrying soil, carrying memory, carrying the weight of lives lost. It is a reminder that history is not only about rulers and palaces, but about communities who found ways to honor their grief. Tel Benat is one of the oldest war memorials in the world, and yet it remains a mystery. Who exactly was buried there? What battles gave rise to their deaths? What stories were told as the mound grew taller? These questions linger, unanswered, like echoes in the wind. But perhaps that is fitting, for memory is not always about clarity. Sometimes it is about the persistence of presence, the refusal to let the past vanish. And in Tel Benat, the past still lingers, layer upon layer, whispering from beneath the dust. The mound stretches on, and with it, so too does its story. The morning sun rose slowly over the flat expanse of the Euphrates plain, washing the land in muted tones of ochre and gold. Around Tel Benat, the people of the settlement began to stir. Fires that had smoldered through the night were fed fresh kindling, sending thin plumes of smoke into the air. The murmur of life returned, children's voices, the calls of herders, the creak of wooden wheels on dry earth, and always, in the background, the silent presence of the mound, looming like a sentinel at the edge of the village. The mound was not simply earth. Beneath its surface lay ordered layers, each one telling a story. The elders knew it, the priests spoke of it, and those who had carried stones and clay to build it remembered the weight in their muscles. The mound had grown with time, each addition tied to an event, a person, or a group of people whose lives had been cut short by conflict. What stood now, a great swelling of packed soil and gravel, was a monument both to grief and to continuity. Travelers who approached along the ancient paths could not miss it. Some saw it as a warning that this community remembered its dead and guarded its past. Others viewed it as a beacon, a sign that here was a people capable of great unity and shared purpose. Stories were told around fires of how the spirits of the mound watched those who passed by, and how at night, when the winds rolled across the Euphrates, faint voices could be heard whispering in the reeds, calling names that had long since faded from memory. Within the village, life moved steadily. Women carried jars of water from the river, balancing them with ease across their shoulders. Farmers tended to barley fields and flax, their hands familiar with the rhythm of growth and harvest. Potters shaped vessels, and children helped gather reeds for weaving mats. Yet no matter how ordinary the task seemed, there was always an awareness that the mound was part of everything. It gave weight to their days, reminding them that life was precious, fleeting, and bound together across generations. In the evenings, when the sky deepened to violet and the stars began their patient watch, families would gather near the mound's base. There, elders told stories, not just of wars, but of ancestors, of those who had lived honorably, who had given themselves for the safety of the settlement, or who had perished in struggles remembered only in fragments. Children listened with wide eyes, their imaginations filling in the gaps, picturing warriors with spears or defenders guarding the riverbanks. The mound was not only a burial place, it was a storybook, its pages written in soil and stone, opened only to those who understood the language of the past. Rituals remained a central part of the mound's existence. At certain times of the year, when the river ran high, or when the moon reached its fullest, processions would climb the slope. Offerings were laid at the summit. Grains, small figurines, fragments of pottery, or even drops of oil poured carefully into the earth. These acts were not for show, they were gestures of binding, of linking the living to the dead. of affirming that the community itself stood upon layers of memory. And with each offering, the mound seemed to breathe, to absorb the devotion of its people. There were whispers that beneath its layers lay not just bones, but objects of great meaning. Perhaps weapons carried in defense, perhaps ornaments worn on final days, perhaps even tokens meant to help the spirits in journeys beyond. The mound kept its secrets well. Unlike the open graves of some places, Tel Bana was sealed tight, as though the people wished not only to honor, but to protect what was inside. In that act of protection lay a message that the past was not for careless eyes. It belonged to the flow of generations, not to those who came seeking treasures without understanding. Yet for all its gravity, the mound did not stand apart from daily joy. Children played at its base, running and laughing, chasing each other until their voices mingled with the wind. Lovers met in the shadows it cast at dusk, speaking softly of futures they hoped would stretch beyond the hardships of their time. Farmers returning from fields paused to rest against its slope, laying down baskets of grain while gazing at the sky. In this way, the mound was both solemn and ordinary, a sacred monument woven into the fabric of common life. As centuries passed, layers continued to build. Each generation seemed to add a touch, sometimes small, a scatter of stones or a shallow covering of soil, sometimes grander, with new tiers carefully shaped. The mound was never finished, because memory itself was never complete. It absorbed sorrow, yes, but also resilience, turning each loss into a reminder that the people endured. In this way, the mound was less a monument to death than a monument to survival. Beyond the village, other communities came to know of it. Traders traveling with caravans along the Euphrates carried tales of the great memorial mound where ancestors slept beneath the earth. Some who heard the stories came to see it, to walk its slope, to leave offerings even if they were not of the same bloodline. The mound's meaning spread, becoming more than local, becoming part of a larger landscape of human remembrance. And so it stood, through shifting dynasties, through changing tools and languages, through the quiet persistence of time. The Tel Bana Memorial was not just a mound of earth, but a mirror of human nature, our need to remember, to give shape to grief, to mark the ground so that we never lose sight of those who came before. As night deepened once more, silence fell across the Euphrates plain. The stars glittered coldly, and the mound rested in their glow, calm and unmoving. Yet within its silence, within its layers, the voices of 4,500 years remained. Not loud, not demanding, just steady, like a heartbeat carried forward into the present. And so the Tel Bana Memorial endures. A monument of soil and stone, a monument of memory, a place where the living and the dead meet in quiet conversation, unbroken across the ages. And so, another fragment of the past slips back into silence. The stones, the soil, and the ruins still hold stories we may never fully understand. Whispers of people who lived, built, and dreamed long before us. Every mystery we uncover is only a doorway to countless more, stretching endlessly into time. As the echoes of history fade for tonight, let them settle softly in your thoughts. The earth will keep its secrets a little longer, waiting patiently for us to return, until we meet again. Rest easy, and let the mysteries keep watch over your dreams.